Hey there, BookTube,
Hi.
Noah, and everyone who reads and must converse is the channel. I'm joined again by Yasmin. Her channel
Hello.
is To the Lithouse. Hey, Yasmin,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. So we've been working through some Borges. I got a new copy of Fictions, and today we're going through the last story in Fictions. Here is called The South. So, what a story it is, right?
It's an amazing story. We
even
both
even on the
liked it right
second
away.
read through, we were pulling
Mm-hmm.
so many things out that we've been
Yeah.
talking and just like how and reassessing how we might you know say what we think about this story. It's
Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
So you want to just jump into it? Let's jump into it
Yeah.
and do kind of our takes on different parts of the narrative and things like that. All right,
Yep.
so this this story is super like episodic. There's it's portraits almost, snapshot after snapshot, disconnected almost from each other, and you don't really it becomes weird. But it starts off, and I wanted to touch on the first thing is the man that stepped off the boat in Buenos Aires in 1871 was a minister of the evangelical church named Johannes Dahlmann. But by 1939, a full, 70 years later, one of his grandsons, Juan Dahlmann, was the secretary of a municipal library on Calle Cordoba. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, and considered himself profoundly Argentine. So, as we know with Borges, he doesn't say anything without a reason for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
his profoundly Argentine is expounded in the rest of that paragraph there, the first paragraph, and very much gives us his alignment. You had said there's a thing where one of his grandfathers is German, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he favors the German grandfather in look and in his profession, but he
Yeah, and then his
idolizes,
name.
right, but he idolizes his Argentinian heritage and sees
Yes.
himself now as profoundly Argentine. At the end of the paragraph, it says plainly, and then something happened to him, right? And this is when I was like fully drawn into the story. He gets a copy of the Arabian Nights. He's a very literary guy. He works
At
in
the
a
library as a secretary.
yeah, right, municipal library, and he got a copy of 1001 Nights, and he's excited, and so instead of taking the elevator, he hops up the stairs, and he hurriedly took the stairs. Something in the dimness brushed his forehead. A bat, a bird. On the face of the woman who opened the door to him, he saw an expression of horror, and the hand he passed over his forehead came back red with blood. His brow had caught the edge of a recently painted casement window that somebody had forgotten to close. So when I read that, I saw, Oren Ishii at the end of Kill Bill when Black Mamba slices the top of her head off and it goes flying, and she says something like, "Wow, that is a sharp katana you have there," and falls over dead.
Mm-hmm.
He like, slices his head completely open
Yeah, and
or
I mean,
something.
yeah, I was telling you, I haven't watched that movie, but yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And we're talking about the word brushed. He brushed,
Yeah,
his head,
something brushed across his forehead.
and then suddenly he's bleeding, and it's absolutely ridiculous how that
So,
happens.
just to let y'all know, Yasmin is reading this in Spanish. So it really is cool to go through it with an Argentinian person that is reading it in the native language. and I'm reading a translation and have no idea of the Argentinian culture. So we're pulling things out from all different places on this. It's really, really fun. But
Mm-hmm.
to go on, he's sitting there. There's like a week or more where people are visiting him and telling him he looks fine when
But he
he
has a
knows
fever.
when he's in hell. He says
Mm-hmm.
that these people aren't acknowledging that I'm in hell. Well, when do people tell you you're fine when you're definitely not fine? When you're dying,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's when it is. Uh, my boy PG, I ain't finna read that, is in the chat. He read Stoner. At the end of Stoner, that's the kind of thing where the guy's dying and somebody says, "Oh, you look great. You look great. Don't worry."
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's just what people do.
Yeah.
So they come and take him. It says in the narrative for an X-ray, and they take him to a sanitarium. Um, he goes to the sanitarium, and then that's the paragraph where it says something that you had brought up in our most recent discussion, that reality is partial to symmetries and slight anachronisms. How does that translate for you? Because that's the translation for me. That reality is
Can
partial
you
to
say it again?
symmetries and slight
And slight
anachronisms.
anachronism. It's exactly the same.
Nice. And you had said and brought up pointedly that I
That's
think
not reality.
yeah, that reality is or how physics works is the breaking of symmetries.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes things happen, because if symmetries were the way that it is, nothing would ever grow. You know, things grow evolutionary by the breaking of symmetries. Now,
Yeah.
the human body per se uh, has a symmetry, uh, top to bottom. Um,
Yeah.
different
And
things in nature.
yeah, you could argue that a lot of things in nature do have symmetry, but what I'm thinking with this is that he's talking about reality like symmetry in the sense that reality likes things to happen symmetrically, and in the sense that he's taken by this car to the hospital and then he's taken back to his house by the same car. So it's this symmetry in narrative, but that's not really reality. That's how we like to look at it. We like to look at things in terms of symmetry and symbolism and order, when in fact things are almost always the opposite of that, and they're just a mess, and we try to pull from different things to make the order work.
Right.
And
Right.
can I just add something really quickly about the
Sure.
hospital? So before that, when he's in the hospital, you said that he keeps bringing up hell and that he's in hell,
Right.
which could be alluding to him dying,
Right.
but also the way that he describes the moment when he gets into the hospital and they undress him and he sees this light that's blinding and all of these things. It feels like torture, and it feels like he's being tortured in hell, and I
Right.
just love how that's described. I just
Right.
wanted to point that out.
And hell is described two times in that
Mm-hmm.
long paragraph,
Yeah.
and then at the end of the paragraph is it's so ridiculous. I mean, this how episodic this thing is. It just switches and changes so quick. He's on the verge of death from from septic infection, which is hardcore, and he stoically uh, endured their procedures. That's just what it says. Their procedures. It doesn't say any any specifics. But the physical miseries, the unending anticipation of bad nights, had not allowed him to think of anything as abstract as death. The next
Mm-hmm.
day, the next day, it says, the
Mm-hmm.
surgeon told him he was coming right along, and soon he'd be able to go out to the country house to convalesce. Incredibly, the promised day arrived. And then he is walking the streets. He goes and gets a breakfast. He gets on a train. These kind of things, and it's just moment after moment, and he's enjoying every single flavor, every single the sky, the streets, the buildings, the cat in the cafe.
Mhm. Mhm.
Everything is just beautiful and awesome. I read this the first time and I thought this is the most optimistic person in the world. This is
Mhm.
the most, or it's this kind of thing of being so close to death that now everything just seems so wonderful because he he's able to, live. And then this is a guy that just knows how to enjoy life, knows how
Mhm.
to, embrace it like that. So I
Yeah.
really I really like this guy.
Mhm. Yep.
I really like this guy. Um, but
And then he, sorry.
um it says when he's on the train that he grabs the
I
first
was gonna
volume of
say.
the Arabian Nights, right? To
Mhm.
travel with his book so closely linked to the history of his torment was an affirmation that the torment was past, and it was a joyous, secret challenge to the frustrated forces of evil.
Yeah.
Um, what is he talking about? You know
Yeah,
what I
I
mean?
know. He,
It's
yes.
grandiose.
Mhm.
It
True. But yes, the Thousand and One Nights is first brought up, like you said, about a page before that. And he says that the illustrations in the 1001 Nights were part of his nightmares or something like that. And so they were this really, really negative thing when he was first feeling a fever and all of that and getting sick. And then here it's
right,
this very positive thing in which he's able to appreciate everything, and him having this book almost feels like, again, the symbol of everything is going to be okay. Everything was meant to work out this way. So it's this
right,
object that's taken as both a negative and a positive thing, depending on how he feels. And I feel like that happens a lot in this story.
right. It's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of internal. I mean, this is all internal how he sees everything, and he is wrapped up in literature and stories or storytelling,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he's telling himself stories as we're going like this. Um, Sherazade, is that how you pronounce it? Sherazade is somebody that's in the 1001 Nights. It's talking about a
I'm not
character
sure
there,
how.
but it says happiness distracted him from Sherazade and her superfluous miracles. Dahlman closed the book and allowed himself simply to live. You know,
Yeah.
just happiness is calling me
Mm-hmm.
away from my reading. I just am it's just gonna sit and be happy. What, riding a train? You know what I mean? and
Right?
and he's just going to his ranch that he's never ever been to before. He's secured this ranch in the south, and he's going there, and this is like his retirement home. This is like his
Mm-hmm.
his big payoff to himself, this kind of ranch, which is called out when we first hear about it at the beginning of the story as a shell of a ranch. There's nothing there. There's just a shell of a home, and he's going there, and it's just a big ideal. It's
Yeah.
idealized to the hilt. So he's walking around because he has to walk now. Um, or this is still on the train. He says he also thought he recognized trees and crops that he could not have told the name of. His direct knowledge of the country was considerably inferior to his nostalgic literary knowledge. So, just to drive home the point that this guy is he lives in literature, he lives in stories, he loves the written word. And 1001 Nights was a story that Borges, or a collection of stories, a huge literary work that Borges loved, is referenced all over in Borges' work. And this guy loves 1001 Nights
Mm-hmm.
and loves his new volume, as he should.
Yes.
So we're getting there.
Yeah. So he's on the train, and then they drop him off a little far away from the place that he's supposed to go. So that's when he starts walking, right?
Yeah.
And then he needs a car, right? Not a car, but a vehicle, it says.
No, he gets off the train and then he has to walk because
Yeah.
they dropped him off at a
Oh,
platform,
that's it.
a different stop than he was used to.
Right, right.
Somebody's
So,
dropped off just wherever, and he looks at it like a small adventure to go
yes,
on this walk, and he
yeah,
just goes. And where was it? It says something to the effect that
what?
um that he like, oh yeah, okay, so he stops at a store. Now this is a stop that he didn't plan on getting off at. He never visits the South. It's something that he doesn't know, but he's looking at it like an adventure. And then the next paragraph starts where he's walking slowly. He's walking slowly, less to keep from tiring, but to make things last, to make the moments last. It's like just
Yes.
relishing in everything. He's relishing in every little thing. It's so awesome. I mean, and I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
man, this guy really knows how to live, you know,
Mm-hmm.
when I first read it. But then it says the very next paragraph starts, the store had once been bright red, but the years had tempered its violent color to its advantage. How did he know the store used to be bright red?
Yeah.
If it's a store, I mean, he's never been there. That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that during the first time we were talking, I called it out and I was just like, what's going on? And then very quickly in that same paragraph is Dahlman thought he recognized the owner. Then he realized that he'd been fooled by the man's resemblance to one of the employees at the sanitarium. And
Mm-hmm.
there, a little red flag went off.
Yes.
You know,
Yep.
you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm sure at that point your wheels were turning because
Yes.
I still was just in the story there, and this kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. He goes into this store and has another meal. It's all he's been doing is traveling, relishing the moments and life, and eating
Living in the
since he got
moment,
out.
like the
Uh,
cat.
and you said you were like, why is he traveling like this? Didn't he go home? Didn't they tell him
Right?
to take some
Like,
antibiotics or
so
something?
yeah, he gets out of the hospital. He doesn't even call work to tell them, like, hey, I'm not dead. I'm gonna, not go to work for a couple weeks because I'm leaving. He just goes straight to the train station without stopping at home, without, I don't know, getting changed or anything, just straight from the hospital.
Right,
And then starts, it,
to the
it
to the
almost feels
train.
like, yeah, like he's floating around in the city, just seeing everything, experiencing everything. As an outsider almost, and yeah, just living in the moment.
It's wild. So he goes into this store, he eats, and these three roughs, or they call them toughs in my book, like a tough guy. They call him toughs, like a Chinese looking tough,
Mm-hmm.
and two of his friends. They start messing with him. They start uh, throwing bread balls at him or spitballs at him.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a gaucho on the
Mm-hmm.
ground like a cowboy, right? A
Yeah.
gaucho on the ground like an old guy, which he calls out as like a personification of the South in a minute.
Right.
But
So,
these three guys
mm-hmm.
start messing with him, and he decides I don't want to get into anything. This would be horrible if I got into some kind of tussle or a fight with these young guys, especially since I'm sick. He calls himself a sick man at
Mm-hmm.
that point. And the guy who owns the store or is working at the store comes over to him and calls him Dahlman, and he's surprised, but not too surprised, but just acknowledges that this guy knows his name now. And he says, "Sir Dahlman, don't mind those guys. They're half high," is what it says. Or Oh,
Hmm.
something like that.
They're like, yeah, they're like happy
Yeah,
in
they're
my
just
book.
partying. They're just,
Hmm.
being wild, pushing, causing
Yeah.
trouble.
Hmm.
And
Yes,
but
bullies.
him saying that kind of heightens the situation, right? And one of the toughs comes over, shows a knife, says, "Let's have a knife fight." And the old gaucho on the ground, throws him a knife. And he bends over and picks it up, knows that he can't fight, but then he recalls, then there's the line. And I should have stayed on my page, because
Okay.
there's the line where he knows that the dagger is not gonna help him at all.
This is, yeah,
He had
gonna sort of,
toyed with a knife now and then, as all men did, but his knowledge of knife fighting went no further than vague recollection that thrusts should be aimed upward, and with a blade facing inward. They never would have allowed this sort of thing to happen at the sanatorium, he thought. And then, uh, I don't know if I can. Okay, yeah. They go outside, and as he crosses the threshold, he feels that on his first night at the sanatorium, when they had stuck that needle in him, dying in a knife fight under the open sky, grappling with his adversary, would have been a liberation, a joy, a fiesta. He sensed that he had been able to choose. He sensed that had he been able to choose or dream his death that night, this is the death he would have dreamed or chosen. So,
and that's where I immediately reread everything.
right, that's when you go back to the beginning of the story
Yes,
and
you're
start
like,
reading.
oh, okay. That happens with every single. I don't know if we mentioned it in a live already, but I'm pretty sure that you have, at least in one of the videos that you made, that Borges always reveals everything
Right.
towards the end, and sometimes you're completely clueless until that very last paragraph.
Well, and
So,
it's not to a detriment to Borges. I want everybody to know that for
oh
sure.
no, yeah.
Borges reveals what he wants you to know, because there is deeper levels to go
Hmm.
into the story than just that twist, just the narrative elements. He's so masterful. So now we've given the narrative elements. What did you think about this guy, Yasmin? You want to go first? Let's
Yes.
what did we think is happening with this story? What is
Okay.
our yeah,
Okay, so I read that and I, like I said, immediately went back to the beginning and reread it. And as I was reading it the first time through, I noticed that, um, like you said, this man was somewhat a passive person. He resembled his German grandfather more than he did his Argentinian grandfather. And his Argentinian grandfather, I don't know if you mentioned this, but his name was Francisco Flores, and he died in a fight. And he died this very heroic death that
yes. Right.
the protagonist admired a lot.
Right.
And it says at the beginning that he chose that death. He sort of chose the death of his brave, heroic grandfather, as if he
Right.
could choose, who to be in
Right.
life. Because in reality, you don't really get to choose what your name is, or whose genes you inherit, or who you look like. But
Right.
he chose this grandfather. And then in that same paragraph towards the end, it's mentioned that he always had fantasies about this house in the south, and that he always imagined that one day he could go there and that the house would be there waiting for him. But it was always in his head, and it was always a fantasy until, after the hospital.
Right.
So, what I'm thinking with this story is that this whole part after the hospital is just his fantasy. And it's what it's revealed at the end that, or
That
not revealed, but
he doesn't leave the sanatorium.
right, that he's at the sanatorium and he's lying there about to die, and he gets a chance to dream his own death the way that he would like it to be, and he chooses this. He chooses the very heroic death of, that resembles the one that his of his other grandfather, Francisco Flores, as opposed
I
to,
think you're exactly
the
right with that.
very uneventful and kind of sad death of just, brushing against something and then having a
Right,
fever and dying, which
right.
is lame compared to this other grandiose death that he imagined.
Even being
Um,
murdered in a knife fight, right?
hmm Yes.
Don't know how to knife fight, but the it does happen like a dream. These things come out of nowhere. This fight comes out of nowhere. The just all the elements of the later
hmm
the second half of the story come out of nowhere, it seems, every time, especially
Right.
the end and the fight. And it's like, what is happening? And it's just like in a dream where, somebody will come up and say, hey, don't get involved with those guys over there. And you are getting involved with those guys over
hmm
there, because
Yes.
but you have this dream person come and, say some thought that you would have, and the dream keeps going on, and it's
Yeah.
so dreamlike. It's very,
And
very cool.
that made me think of something that when in a dream, you always know what's going on and you always feel like it makes sense when you're in that dream. And then once
Right,
you wake up, you go like, wait a second, that alien that was talking to me, it doesn't really make sense how that worked out.
right,
But it's the same here. Like we're reading it and all these symbols that he's noticing, like at one point he says, the cool breeze of autumn, is sort of the symbol of me getting better, and it's getting rid of the oppressive heat of the summer or something like that, when in fact autumn is a symbol for death and all of these things, but he's seeing
right,
it in a completely different way. He's seeing it the way that he
right.
wants to see it.
Yeah, it's like the breeze of autumn was like giving him a new life after the
Like
sanatorium.
why?
And it's like, wait,
Yeah.
autumn is when everything
hmm
dies. Everything
exactly.
goes down, or the harvest, and then, everything goes down. Um,
Exactly. And as soon as he gets out of the hospital, he uh it says something like he remembered things before he even saw them. So that was sort of one of my first clues as I was reading it the first time, and
right.
I was like, something's off. He remembered
Uh,
everything before he saw it, so
In
is this
rereading,
part of his
that's
memory? Yeah, and
it,
rereading it,
it's
it all made
it's
sense.
over. It's time and time again in the story. In rereading, you see that he's recollecting things, then he
Mm-hmm.
sees them. He
Right.
remembers something, then he sees it. The cat, he remembers the cat in the cafe, then he sees it.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
Exactly.
It's
And
it's
he knows things that he's not supposed to know. So how those walls were read before, like you mentioned, how does he know that? It's
right.
because, it might all be in his mind. And then how this man just suddenly recognizes him and he says, Mr. Dolman, like, sure, he might look like his grandfather, but even then, the people down south who might have known his grandfather wouldn't have known that his name wasn't, Flores, because his grandfather's last name was Flores, and
Except he looks
they
like a
call him.
German.
hmm So that too. So that doesn't make sense unless he's imagining that, I think. And
Right.
yeah, there are just many instances, and then there's the big
Many.
instance in which it's narrated that he feels like as if he were two men. One of them was
Right.
walking the streets and the other one was stuck in the hospital, just because the two experiences are so different, but it also lends itself to the interpretation that it is two men. One of them is the fantasy and the other one's the real man.
Right. Very cool. I would add something that only thing I would add as far as interpretive
hmm
is like, not only is the setting and the plot there so much fantasy and dreamlike and just weird like that, but him he is an ideal of himself in that
hmm
second part of this story. A stoic, bearing it stoically, all the procedures and things that he's going through, just happy, uh after he's getting out, happy, living life, knows how to really live, this guy. And bearing the bullying, uh, any inconvenience like getting off at the wrong station because of the train and having to walk. Oh well, it's time for an adventure, guys. Just all good. He's an
Mm-hmm.
idealized version of himself, is what it is. And I think that we know as well that Borges loves Cervantes and Don Quixote from
Mm-hmm.
the story of the Secret Miracle and others, the kind of things that he did with those not the Secret Miracle,
No,
Pierre Menard,
yes.
uh, and I mean and others. I mean he brings up Don Quixote or Cervantes in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
That this guy is a very loving literature. You said you saw Borges
Yeah, I
in
see
this
a
main
lot of
character.
Borges.
I can
Mm-hmm.
see him, doing a riff on this kind of person that is more comfortable facing or more comfortable living in storyland, in dreamland, and
Mm-hmm.
in his own narratives that he's inventing than facing the reality that his life has turned out to be chalked up to. He's gonna live in a sanitarium until he dies from, and maybe there's even a bit of like actual brain injury that is causing all this, that he had the top of his head cut off, did not
Mm-hmm.
die, but now is mentally infirm and lives in a fantasy world. I guess we'll
Right.
never know. We'll never
So,
know if Borges wanted to go that far with it, or if it's just that he's choosing the fantasy over his reality or something like that. But
mm-hmm. Yeah,
I love it. I think we did a good job,
me
Yasmin. What do
too.
you think?
Yes, me too.
Very cool. Thank you for coming by again and knocking out another Borges short story with
Of
me.
course. My pleasure.
See you later, BookTube. Bye bye.